Good afternoon. We have concluded the ministerial meeting of the Group of 20 held in Johannesburg. First of all, I would like to thank my South African friends for the excellent organization of the discussion, both in terms of its content and in terms of the resolution of numerous protocol and organizational issues. The main topic of the exchange of views of foreign ministers was the importance of strengthening the voice of developing countries in making global decisions. There has been a certain progress in this direction. Since last year, the African Union has become a full-fledged participant of the Group of 20. We are interested in the same status of the League of Arab States and the Latin American and Caribbean countries. We welcome this attitude and believe that at some stage the Eurasian Economic Union can also claim a similar status, since all the mentioned unions demonstrate positive dynamics in terms of their contribution to the development of international economic ties. We have presented our vision of international problems and their solutions in the period when multipolar realities are beginning to be recognized by many. The fact that multipolarity is emerging is at least obvious for us and for the BRICS countries. The BRICS countries are the seventh largest country in terms of gross domestic product. The BRICS has a share of 37% of the world GDP, while the seventh country has 29%. This raises the question of the need to reform global economic institutions in order to reflect the real weight of the countries. We have discussed the need to build non-discriminatory economic ties. Russia is ready to contribute to the further progress in this direction. There are a lot of problems. Most of the participants in the meeting in Johannesburg said that there is a very low chance that the UN-approved goals of sustainable development will be implemented by 2030. Only 17% of these goals have a chance to be implemented. At the same time, there will be inequality and other problems in the world. We welcome the steps that can be taken through the transfer of technologies, additional financing, food aid. These steps will not be enough to radically change the situation. The global economy is characterized by a disproportionate increase in defense and military spending. According to the estimates of Western experts, they amounted to $2.4 trillion a year. Of course, Zelensky's regime is a good example of this. It has absorbed hundreds of billions of dollars in military aid, which could have been spent on vital programs for the development of Africa. By the way, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have set records on supporting Zelensky's regime by issuing loans, which are many times higher than those issued by African and other developing countries. We have noted that global stability is being undermined, and this has a negative impact on the global economy. We have called for respect for the general norms of international law from our Western colleagues. We have emphasized the importance of restoring the role of the UN as a place for the state to cooperate and develop an honest balance of interests. We have also noted the role of multilateral structures that work on the basis of consensus, including the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Eurasian Economic Union, the African Union, the League of Arab States, and the CELAC. All this creates additional opportunities for solving emerging problems at the regional level. At the global level, the role of BRICS is attracting the attention of everyone. We have informed our colleagues about the results of last year's BRICS summit in Kazan, where a number of promising ideas were formulated. As for the 2020 mandate, I mean the BRICS payment and accounting mechanisms, the investment platform, and the grain exchange. The Group of 20, if we are talking about the structures that play a certain role in international economic relations, the Group of 20 preserves the role of the platform, the dialogue between the old and the new centers of power. We spoke in favor of preserving the economic profile of this union, as it was supposed to be at the very beginning of its creation in 2008. Without politicizing the 2020 mandate, as our Western colleagues have been trying to do in recent years, we have started to politicize the 2020 mandate. The attempts have always been unsuccessful, but the efforts and nerves of the participants, especially of the CELAC, are great. We have drawn the attention of our colleagues to a very significant date, namely the 60th anniversary of the UN Declaration on the provision of independence to colonial countries and nations. Our country, the Soviet Union, played a leading role in adopting this document. Despite the successes of the countries of the Global South, which have been liberated from the time of exploitation, the problem has not been completely solved. I mean the fact that there are 17 non-self-governing territories left in the world. Colonial dependence has largely given way to neo-colonial dependence. The former metropolises of Western transnational corporations have monopolized the markets and supply chains, and they use the advantages they have to pump natural resources and raw materials from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. This is not normal in the 21st century, and this is why we support our partners from the rest of the world, who are speaking up for the liberation from neo-colonial practices. The UN, which has led the G20 this year, is concluding a series of presidencies in BRICS countries, which began in 2022, when Indonesia was at the head of the G20, India in 1923, and Brazil in 1924. Such a series of BRICS presidencies in the G20 gave a positive result, which strengthened the position of the Global South in our forum. All this contributes to the establishment of a more just, multilateral order based on the sovereign equality of states, as required by the UN Charter and on all other principles of the Charter. In general, we are satisfied with the results of the meeting. The disagreements, of course, have not disappeared, but the conversation continues, and this is always useful. I believe that in Johannesburg we have managed to set a positive vector for further cooperation in the G20 to raise attention to the acute problems of the African continent, but also of other countries of the global South. And this is a useful contribution to the work of the G20 summit in Johannesburg in November 2025.
You said that the G20 is primarily an economic union, and yet the representatives of the UN, opening the G20 presidency, set themselves the goal of achieving a consensus on the Ukrainian crisis in the G20. How do you see it? How successful is it? And is it possible for such a consensus to exist among the participants?
Well, I don't know that the UN representatives set such a goal, but at least I watched carefully how they entered into their rights and how our Sherpas worked. They did not have such a task. They just confirmed to us. I was accepted by President Ramaphosa yesterday, and today we had a lengthy conversation with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the UN. They confirmed that they fully support the need not to withdraw from the G20 mandate. Trade, financial, economic, logistical issues, transport. So I did not consider, and my colleagues who worked on the preparation of the G20 summit did not consider such a tendency. Anton Zolotnitsky, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the UN. The United States has ignored the meeting in Johannesburg at a high level. As we know, at the same time, the previous meetings and summits were openly interpreted. The West is trying to take the Ukrainian agenda. You mentioned it.
The United States has ignored the meeting in Johannesburg at a high level, as we know. At the same time, the previous meetings and summits were openly interpreted. The West is trying to take the Ukrainian agenda. You mentioned it. How can you neutralize such a destructive influence of the EU? And in this regard, is there a future in the G20?
As you said, the previous meetings were torpedoed by the West in an attempt to Ukrainianize them. I would say that this is not entirely true. Previous attempts of the West to Ukrainianize the G20 agenda were torpedoed by the other participants of this union. If you look at the final documents, when all the participants of the G20 agreed to include a small text on geopolitical issues, you will not find anything that could be rejected by the Russian side. In the last year, there have been a lot of issues, including the Palestinian issue in the Gaza Strip and in the Middle East. However, in order to agree on these small texts, it takes a lot of time and effort. Our experts have spent a lot of money on this. However, the influence of the West on the issues of Palestine, Ukraine, and Africa, where the conflicts are on the rise again, is not significant, because all political and crisis situations have the same format. On the other hand, I would like to note that the G20 leaders' statements have not affected the economic discussions that are responsible for the multilateral peace agreement.
What do you think about the G20 summit? The world's aggressive minority is becoming less and less. Schultz, Macron, Callas are becoming more and more mechanized. What do you think they are going to do?
I am surprised by this. Kaja Kallas spoke here at the G20 with the same set of accusations. She made some plans that would not allow Russia to take its legal place in the world. Probably, there is a tragicomic element in all this. I would also like to mention her statement about the meeting between Russia and the U.S. in Riyadh on February 18th, when she said that the TV picture of the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, the U.S. Secretary of State, and the National Security Advisors, Moscow and Washington, gave the impression that Russia was the winner. This mentality has not disappeared. Since the Soviet Union fell apart when it was necessary to build new relations in Europe and Eurasia, either you are with us or you are against us. In 2004, when there was the first coup in Ukraine, which was not a manifestation of the Western system, the situation became worse. In 2004, when the U.S. Supreme Court of Ukraine did not recognize Yanukovych's victory in the second round, it appointed the Constitutional Court of Ukraine, which manipulated Yanukovych and won. Before the third round, Yanukovych publicly said that he was calling on the Ukrainian voters to make the right choice, either with Russia or with Europe. This confrontation has not disappeared, but the desire to prevent anyone from leaving the influence of the Western countries is still there. They are still trying to do this in all parts of the world, including in the post-Soviet space. Speaking of those people who are now trying to tell the story of Yanukovych, I would like to mention the NATO General Secretary Rutte, who acts as if he is the president of a very large and powerful country, but he is not an official who has to reflect the consensus of all his members. When he travels around the world, even in the capitals of NATO member states, he demands not to allow peaceful settlement, which will allow Russia to benefit from the special military operation. According to our sources, he instructs Zelensky to stand on his own feet, not to show weakness, and he emphasizes the inability of Kyiv to soften its position. Of course, this is a hoax. In this case, Rutte is abusing his functions, because we know that not all NATO members want to spend money on Ukraine's military. Not everyone wants to do what Zelensky wants. However, the truth will prevail. You can hear the voices of some European countries and Washington. We have discussed the results of our talks. The President has touched on this topic several times. The main thing is not that we give in to someone, or someone gives in to us. This is either or. It should not exist. There should be an understanding that politics and diplomacy are, first of all, a dialogue, a desire to hear the other person and to find in his statements what coincides with your interests. Then there will be a consensus on certain issues, which does not mean that disagreements will be completely eliminated. This will never happen. But the main thing is that where the interests coincide, the results should be achieved and implemented in practical cases, including in the economy. where the interests do not coincide, the confrontation should not be degraded.
How did the 20 countries react to the Russian-American dialogue?
Everyone welcomed our meeting. Everyone understands that this is not the end of the era of the confrontation between Russia and the West, but the fact that the beginning of the conversation is a return to normality is recognized and welcomed by absolutely everyone. And the way the tragicomic characters leading the Brussels bureaucracy and NATO reacted to the meeting in Riyadh is very indicative. The very fact that representatives of the two great powers sat down and talked, expressed their position, is perceived as a betrayal of the interests of the West. They are not healthy people, and by and large, all our interlocutors from the countries of the world's majority treat this way, although maybe not all of us are told about this directly, but it seems that this is how it is. In the project of the resolution of the General Assembly of the UN, which on February 24th was signed by Britain, France, Germany, and 29 other countries, Moscow demands an immediate and unconditional withdrawal of troops from Ukraine. The US, for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, did not become co-authors of such a project of resolution in Ukraine.
The UN General Assembly, which was convened on February 24, and which the United Kingdom, France, Germany, the Baltic countries, and other countries have signed, demands from Moscow an immediate ceasefire in order to withdraw the troops from Ukraine. The United States, at the beginning of the special military operation, did not become the co-authors of such a project of resolution to Ukraine. Do you think this indicates a shift in relations between Russia and the United States and the beginning of a retreat?
They are not healthy people, and by and large, all our interlocutors from the countries of the world's majority treat this way, although maybe not all of us are told about this directly. But it seems that this is how it is. In the project of the resolution of the General Assembly of the UN, which on February 24th was signed by Britain, France, Germany, and 29 other countries, Moscow demands an immediate and unconditional withdrawal of troops from Ukraine. The U.S., for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, did not become co-authors of such a project of resolution in Ukraine.
What are the questions that the Russian media are working on now? Preparing for the possible meeting of Presidents Trump and Putin? When will such a meeting take place?
When the meeting takes place, you will find out what questions we are working on. Confidentiality is an integral part of the preparation of any diplomatic process. I am sure that we will inform you in due course, but first of all, the Kremlin's press service will inform you.
What questions does the Russian media now prepare for the meeting of Presidents Trump and Putin? What is the position of Russia in the framework of the negotiations on the Ukrainian crisis? Where were the negotiations? What is the position of Russia in the framework of the negotiations on the Ukrainian crisis?
We do not touch on this issue. We believe that this is a gross violation of all the principles laid down by the West in the world economy. The mechanism of a free market was collapsed. In addition, the Russian assets are being stolen. It is a shame. They are not just being stolen, but even using interest to finance a war against our country by the Ukrainians. Recently, there was information that a number of Western companies are ready to return and resume their business in Russia. I believe that our economic bloc reacted very correctly. The reason for this is that during the years of this hybrid war, including illegal sanctions, we have done a lot to boost the development of our own industries. Until recently, we were seriously dependent on the United States, the European Union, Japan, and so on. This new state of affairs has allowed us to realize how useful it is for our economy to master our own technologies, which in some cases are already superior to Western analogs. The same logic should be followed when we talk not about the return of Western companies to Russia, but about the return of our own industries, which will not pose any risk to our economy in the event of a re-election. The same logic should be followed when we talk about sanctions. Sanctions have taught us and inspired us to carry out serious reforms in order to rebuild our economy in the interests of self-development, regardless of the whims of those who still consider themselves the leaders of the world, including the world economy. Let me finish with what I started with. I believe that multilateralism is gaining momentum, and the pace of growth of new powerful centers of power, economic, political, and financial, is unstoppable. In this sense, the importance of the Group of 20 is preserved in order for its Western participants to understand the irreversibility of this process and to join it. We do not say that multilateralism excludes the West. They are also part of our planet, part of the world economy, part of international life. The Group of 20 is a good place to exchange views and to work for the education of our Western colleagues. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое.